Hey, welcome back to Gather, Connect, Create. I'm your host, Megan Schultz, and this is the podcast where week after week, I hope to leave you with inspiring stories, thought-provoking conversations, and new ideas for ways that you can gather, connect, and create wherever you find yourself. I do believe that we were meant to go through this world together, and I think sometimes we just need a little nudge to get us to put that into practice. Oh, listeners, today I have a treat. I am so excited about this conversation. And I have a feeling there may be some new listeners this week who also are enamored with today's guest. And that is because of the beautiful, radical simplicity of her ideas. Today I am talking with Dr. Jane Shore. And let me just read you her bio because I don't want to miss any of it. Jane R. Shore is the founder of School of Thought and a learning scientist and gathering strategist known for meaningful connections and memorable experiences. Shore helps individuals involved in teaching and learning across varied settings connect with innovations and each other, co-creating human-centered, people-based learning through her convenings, writing, and advisory work. She has an incredible Substack. If you're not already following it, please hop on there and do, called School of Thought. And she is so generous with what she shares on the weekly, which is how I found out about her, and which is the reason I actually reached out to her. So this, for me, is something new. She's not a local thought leader. She is a thought leader on the national and international scale who essentially, it feels like, is on this mission to make these big ideas about learning and about learning in person, people-based learning. This is her thing, to make it accessible and usable for all of us. And what I love so much is that she brings the academic depth and the research to real-world experience. And she does this beautifully, both in writing and in visuals, because she is a graphic illustrator with these concepts around people-based learning. This idea that learning isn't just about information or doesn't just come from the top down, but it's about how we create and make meaning in relationship and in community. We're going to talk all about that in this interview. But I got connected to Jane through a friend of mine who had worked with her, and basically sent her a cold email saying, hey, I love what you're doing. I love this Substack that you just wrote. Any chance you might want to come on the podcast and talk about it? Not knowing if she would actually even get the email, because I don't know how those reply at all the letters and numbers to Substack work, if that actually lands in a human's inbox. And B, even if it did, whether she'd have time or would even want to. And I am so grateful that she said yes. And so grateful that I can share this conversation with you, because I really feel it in my body and in my soul that she is on the forefront of something so ancient and so novel. So I'm excited to see where this goes, because she did just release a book into the universe last month. And I think she's onto something in the academic and educational world. But really, beyond that, if you're involved in connecting, in community building, in just being a human and trying to survive and thrive, I think people-based learning is where it's at. I am going to drop right into the conversation. So I hope you'll stick with us all the way to the end. It is worth it. I promise. Welcome, Jane. I explained to listeners in the introduction how I made contact with you to ask you to join me on this podcast, because I was so intrigued by one of your most recent Substack posts, because you are somebody I have been following. Although I do have to be honest with you, I am a new School of Thought subscriber, or relatively newish to your work. And I thought, what the heck? I'll just reach out. The worst that can happen is you can say no, or you can ignore it, or, but I thought I would get you on the pod if you agreed, and we would talk about this Substack, and it would be a fun little food for thought episode for listeners who follow, because what I hope to do and what I think listeners enjoy getting from this podcast is just little snippets and new perspectives of ways to gather, connect, and create, right? But then I started going down the rabbit hole of School of Thought and your work. And I started reading your book, People Based Learning, which came
Thank
out
you.
last month. Yes. And investigating this high school that you co founded in Philadelphia. And now I feel like I want to have a whole series about what you do because
My
I'm so.
gosh.
I'm so intrigued
Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
in awe and excited by and like feel so aligned with your work because I feel like you are articulating and giving voice to just what I have been thinking. And the whole reason I wanted to start this podcast in the first place, because I feel so strongly that uh, just how much we need each other and
Mm,
how much we need our stories and our experiences in and with I'm learning this word from you, with community, right? If we're ever going to get
preposition.
ourselves yes out of this mess we find ourselves in right now. So I might just have to throw out my initial reason for having you on just so that we can talk and talk and talk and see where this goes.
Oh my gosh.
That was a
Yeah.
very long-winded way of saying welcome, Dr. Jane Shore, and thank you for saying yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I feel like there are so many pieces that I want to pull apart of like just gratitude. I am in a place right now where I get to talk about, this idea of connection and how important it is and the idea of learning with and through each other. And so this is what it's all about. I mean, I,
Yes.
I got I got the opportunity to write a book and it just flooded out with regard to like the stories of how we learn with and through each other and how ancient it is and how
Yes.
essential it is and how generative it is. And then I
Yes.
realized like the best part of that process of writing a book is getting to do this. I am so grateful to be on a podcast with you and talk to you about it. And one of the things you said was, you just thought, I will reach out and ask. And that's kind of my philosophy lately. If I want to learn something, I have just been reaching out. I'll find something, I'll listen to something, or I'll watch something, I'll hear somebody interviewed, a New York Times journalist, or like a Stanford professor, or, a farmer that's dealing, one of the groups of people that, we talked to contribute to the book were people that were in the farming industry. And
Mm.
all of a sudden you have this like wealth of stories that help you frame the world. And it's one of my favorite parts of being in the
Yes.
place in my life I am right now, like just having the book out and getting to talk to people about it and just asking, hey, can I talk
Yes.
to you about this?
Yes. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, good, because I've got lots of questions.
Yeah.
So, but I'm wondering for just to set some context for those listeners who might not have heard of your work or School of Thought or people based learning, can you sort of give us your elevator pitch? What is it and what do you do with it?
So the one liner is people based learning is learning with and through other people.
Mm.
In education, I've spent a lot of time in education. I was a teacher, I did learning science research, I was a research scientist for many years, and in schools, and started a school and get to work with schools. And there are terms that are used. They're called PeBL, project based learning. They stand for problem based learning, place based learning. At the root of it all is this P that I was like missing. The missing P. I don't know if that's going to be a title. It's not really that catchy. But the idea of people, because that's where we're rooted.
Mm.
And especially in learning settings, we so often find ourselves thinking of learning as something individual.
Mm.
And in so many ways that I got to talk about in the book, and then I got to hear from in hundreds of conversations, learning really happens between us. So, you're in a learning setting and there's information that's shared. When you do something with that information in the world with others is when it sticks. So
Mm.
people based learning is all about that rooted understanding that we learn with and through each other. And that learning becomes the most durable learning because it holds so much. It holds inclusivity, it holds others, it holds emotion, it
Mm.
holds the action that we can take from learning. And so the one liner is people-based learning is with and through each other. And it goes deeper into understanding the way we've set up a lot of learning settings has us doing learning individually versus between us. So it's just a shift. It's in naming.
Yeah. Yeah. The one line that I grabbed from the book was people-based learning is an orientation and a framework for designing learning that engages both hearts and minds and turns understanding into action. And I feel like that last part too is so key, the action part, because you do think of the way our school systems are set up. You think of learning coming from the teacher to the student and top down. And then does the student do anything with that? Sometimes they do, but sometimes they take the test and then whoop out, it's gone. But that the kind of learning that you're talking about and that you describe so much in the book is just so experiential and tangential and in community that we're motivated to do something because now we know, and now we've talked to somebody or we've learned from somebody who's in that situation, and we want to help make a difference or do something. I feel like action is key in what you're talking about.
So the people-based learning model, what came from a lot of the work that we did, so I keep referring to the work that we did, hundreds of conversations over the last couple of years, youth-led, most of them were youth-led and small groups, and we extracted them together to make sense of them. And so they were recorded, they were uploaded, we all looked at transcripts, and from that, there were a few things that were shared in the book. And one of them is a model for people-based learning, and it has 3 parts, and they're sort of, I'm very visual, so I'm like using my hands to describe this, and this isn't going to be audio, but the idea of 3 circles that connect with one another and move back and forth. And the idea is connecting, reflecting, and affecting. So connect, reflect, affect. The idea is people-based learning is all about connecting with people and ideas, reflecting on how it fits for you, reflecting on the ways in which that sits and resonates, that fits into your schema, like things you've already learned. Where does it go in your brain? And then affecting, taking it somewhere. And so the idea of affect is really important. And you mentioned schools. I've also been thinking about just settings where we are as adults. Imagining there's so much learning that happens in work and in life. And there are opportunities to sit back and say, maybe we shouldn't be lecturing to people. Maybe we could be engaging them, giving people ideas and engaging them. And then that becomes something that they can take with them and own it and co-own it. So it is really rooted in that action.
Yes. Well, I wonder if you could maybe just sort of along the lines of explaining this even further, give an example of sort of a traditional way of doing something or learning something, and maybe in our current educational model versus what a people-based learning would do with that same experience. I know in the book you talked about a 10th grade environmental class and building a solar powered car, but maybe you probably have all sorts of examples, or that one just to kind of nail it, for listeners.
The one that's on my mind right now. So I had the opportunity to join a team and co-found a school, and my son graduated from that school last year. And so, there have been opportunities to visit classes, but I got to both be part of the school and also hear my own child come home with learning that happened. So the first story that comes to mind, so you said, what would it look like in a traditional classroom versus a people-based classroom? And so here is an example. In a traditional classroom, when we are learning about the way the government works or the way our system is set up, the electoral college and voting and all the things that are really important for, us all to understand and to be engaged in conversation and possibly policy building around and all kinds of other things. We learn that, we learn it in history, we learn it in government classes, we learn it in the school that I had the opportunity to be part of, Revolution School in Philadelphia. When my son was, I guess it was his senior year last year, he was going to be voting for the first time. And a lot of the seniors were going to be voting for the first time in this very consequential election. And so we live in Philadelphia, and right outside the door, there's this famous park called Love Park, which is right near City Hall. And certainly you can go into City Hall and lots of different opportunities to just connect and have an understanding of what democracy looks like by sitting in spaces where it's happening. But this assignment was to go to Love Park and identify and talk to people who did not have the opportunity to vote in the previous election and ask them why. And there was a lot of preparation that went into that. So there are things that as we begin to talk about what people-based learning is, we uncover some of the intentionality that could happen in learning spaces around what kinds of skills we're really building. And there was preparation. And then the senior class went to Love Park. And I know this, I heard a lot of stories from other people, but I'll tell you the story from my son. The first person he spoke to, he stopped someone and said, did you have the opportunity to vote in the last election? Very purposely asking that way so that it's about opportunity. And the guy said, I have a story for you. So in the last election, as many cities as has happened probably in many cities, there were lines around the corner for the voting. So there were very, very long lines, which is like, yay, democracy. But there were very long lines. And this man said, I got a call while I was in line that my wife was in labor with my first child. And so Avery, that's my son, he first said he was, had a conversation with this guy because the guy, of course, wanted to tell him all the details. And it became very personal. And he said, I had a choice. Am I there for the birth of my son or do I vote? And I left. I got out of line. And that was one of the stories. He ended up talking to the guy for a long time. And what he brought home, yes, was the story. But he also said, I could talk to someone that I didn't know. There were all kinds of things that came out that felt so important. And someone who has an experience that he didn't have, that the people in his life didn't have, there was this, I guess a lot of the kids were predicting that people would say things like, well, we don't believe in democracy or our vote doesn't matter. That's not what any of them found. Honestly, they all had different stories, but they didn't really find that's not what they concluded. So a few months later, I don't know how much long later, probably just a month later, we were voting, and it's like, he has his dad and his mom coming in, like we're all excited. And, even the people like the voting here in Philadelphia, he's walking and they're like, first time, he's so excited.
Yes.
And I'm like taking pictures of his back with his backpack outside the curtain and ridiculous. But he had a different feeling when he showed up because it was his experience to learn that some people don't have the opportunity to vote for reasons outside of their control. And all of a sudden, voting was something very different for him. And the understanding of what it meant and what democracy meant and what he was paying attention to. And all of a sudden, he was like, this electoral college thing, there were questions that came up because it was rooted in learning through a person the kinds of lessons that you can't transmit sitting inside a classroom. So I think, I didn't have that experience. I didn't have an experience, before I voted for the first time. Certainly we weren't going out asking people. I think that expanding the lessons right outside the classroom, literally walking out onto, into the park that is very close to the school, enabled the story to expand and the learning to deepen. And I think about the model we talk about in the book about it becoming more durable and emotional and actionable. And it actually spells idea. So I also think it becomes more inclusive. So IDEA. When you learn through people-based learning, that person that he spoke to is someone that he would not have encountered in his regular life, in his organic connection to the world. This was fairly inorganic, going up to a stranger in a park.
Right.
And then it becomes more durable. He will still tell that story. And it's really his story. It became emotional. The guy had a really emotional story. And then his action of voting, it just changed his orientation to the world. It changed his orientation to voting. He wasn't just showing up as a first-time voter that everybody's excited about. I think that there were a lot of stories that we got to collect from people in the conversation campaign that allowed them to just say like humanizing issues they're learning about. And it goes from all classes. I mean, I'm taking something from history, but I'll also say you can do people-based learning for math. Can I tell another story?
Yeah, please.
So when we were first starting Revolution School, one of the things that we wanted to do was ensure, wherever you put a school, not all the students are going to feel like it's their neighborhood. So one of the ideas was to walk outside and say, what are some of the questions that you have about where you are right now? Philadelphia is a city of murals. And so there are lots and lots of murals. And some of the young people in that very first class said, we don't know the story of these murals. I won't go into all the details. So it was like, we don't really know. There's so many murals. And what about the stories around this neighborhood? So their job was to find out if the neighbors knew the stories and to sort of walk in and out of some of the local spaces. So they knew who their neighbors were. They knew who the local shop owners were. What they concluded was nobody knew the stories of the mural.
Wow.
So they contacted the mural arts program in Philadelphia, and in collaboration with a local media company, or it's a like a local broadcasting media called PhillyCam, they were able to form a partnership with Mural Arts and create audio of the neighborhood murals. So if you visit that neighborhood, you can look at and you can say, here's the first one. And if you walk over here, the students created these stories. And the reason that I say you could even have math. So that was, building skills and talking to the local owners, feeling ownership of your neighborhood, understanding the history of mural arts. And it's actually controversial in Philadelphia because it was an anti-graffiti. There was all kinds of racial tension and, what is art and what is publicly available to people. So there were a lot of issues the students got to learn about the history of the mural arts program. They also learned how to create a mural, which involves a lot of math, apparently. So how you start with what you're going to have projected up into a huge space, and suddenly there's all this algebra that's involved. And so finding ways, so they've talked to people, they told stories to people, they connected with people, they got to understand through the people that create the murals that the math that's involved. And it just became more real. And all of those elements, all of those stories that allow you to learn with and through others, through programs and through talking to people and through the act of creating something that's going to be shared with others, just allows the learning to get wordified.
Yeah. Sticky. So, I love that. That you keep coming back in the book to the word sticky. And I love that.
Yeah.
Because it does just stick. It's funny. A phrase that you used recently in one of your Substacks, and I think it was about somebody else's work, but I think it wholly describes people-based learning as well, is that it is both obvious and deeply underappreciated. Absolutely. And I found that in my own mind so much as I was reading your book, and as your Substacks come through, I would have these simultaneous mind-blowing ahas, and then coupled with yeah, like that's how it should be. Of course. Yeah. I was calling, maybe I'll bleep this out or cut it out altogether, but I was calling it like the no versus holy like that.
I like it.
I think
I like it.
Your juxtaposition better because yours were like, you wrote this. I can't remember where I found it now, but you said what I've discovered is both simple and profound, ancient and radical, timeless and timely. Like that's way more profound than and holy shit.
No, I like yours too.
I think it's the same kind of thing. It's like, yes. And I think to what you bring so beautifully to this conversation is the research around it, around the like, but there's actually like why we should do this. So I love that.
Yeah, there's a lot of research. And speaking of, you said, just ask somebody if you want to talk to them. A lot of the researchers, I spent a lot of time in research, and there were people you look to for understanding how learning works, learning sciences, some of the foundational researchers. And a lot of them I got to talk to and were part of the conversations, learning with and through them in the book, especially, certain chapters really highlight it's not just a philosophy, it's biological. So I'll mention Dr. Suzanne Diker, who is at NYU. She's a neuroscientist, and she's been doing a lot of work on brain synchrony. I want to be really careful about the way I even mention any of the work on the brain, because sometimes it's easy to take it a step further than they're actually going in those brain science and neuroscience. So it's not that. So I'm just saying that from the very beginning before I even talk about her research. But one of the things that she's been doing over the last few years is looking at engagement and what it looks like in the brain when students are really engaged in a class. And one of the things that she found was that when you're really engaged, your brain tends to sync with the person who is offering instruction and the way that your brain sync and the other students who are engaged. And that correlates with effectiveness in learning. And this is really important in that there are going to be times where our brains engage with others in ways we don't even realize. And it ends up being associated with more effective experiences and learning. And when I say effective, it's durable. It's work that really becomes yours, when you're engaged. It's not something that like you get quizzed and then you don't remember the next day. So they've been doing these studies. And when you compare it to individuals who, when their brains are not as synced, the learning isn't as effective. And actually they've also done a lot of work on being in real life versus being on Zoom. And there's a difference. And the synchrony is different. And when we think about it, there are all kinds of, we might call them invisible connections. So we know that when you spend time with somebody for a while and you feel connected to them, your heartbeats tend to sync. And the whole idea of brain synchrony, it's not a state you want all the time, because actually when you disagree with someone or when your knowledge is different from theirs, your brains might not be syncing. And actually that is good learning. So it's not, we want everybody's brain to sync in classes and that means engagement and this is how you do it. But it does say that there's something biological that's connecting us. And when we aren't intentional about it, we can lose that essential piece of the learning puzzle. So just being intentional by naming it, understanding, and sometimes, this is true for a lot of learning when we talk about learning. Like years ago, I had the opportunity to be involved in, the research behind learning strategies, and learning to learn can make learning feel like it takes longer. You have to stop and pause and annotate. And I hear my kids saying these things all the time, like, I have to do this. But you realize when you stop and pause and when you spend the time to hear the story, you remember it better. You can use it in your own learning. You're able to be more generative with the learning. So it becomes part of like you. And there's just a lot of research. I mean, I also got to work with, and she blurbed my book, which I was so honored. And I got to meet her about a month ago in LA, Dr. Mary Helen Imordino Yang. She is a professor at USC and in neuroscience also. I didn't just talk to neuroscientists, but this was part of it. But she does a lot of work on emotion and the fact that we cannot separate emotion and learning. And there's all kinds of interesting work in terms of understanding what transcendent learning really is, understanding building empathy in learning settings helps us learn. It helps us understand what we're learning. And she has all this work that's happening right now and really fascinating work that she's been doing for many, many years and decades. The tie between emotion and learning is rooted in this neuroscience. They can see it happening and the activity that happens in the brain and the body, along with all kinds of other research.
Yeah. It's just so fascinating the way you're bringing the research that is out there into practice, which I think is also one of the things you do. And you also do it so well. I want to make sure we talk about the visuals because you are, of course, an artist, and the visuals are a huge part of helping readers understand this perspective. Way back in season 2, I think it was, of this podcast, we had one of Milwaukee's incredibly talented graphic recorders on the show to talk about the concept of visuals as a way of processing this kind of generative dialogue. And it is huge. It is the visuals that you put together and how you describe the different takeaways from the book and the framework. It's really, really, really helpful. Is that a passion project turned now into part of the research?
So first of all, thank you. Also, think that spending so many years in research, there are a lot of reasons that I have found that research doesn't make it to practice. It's challenging. It's not really written for users in mind. And across certain fields, especially like learning and education, it is something that feels very much like it's written for other researchers. And so I have always been fascinated by people who can bring data visualization into research. And we started a school, as I said, and it was 2019 that we opened, and then 2020 happened and it was COVID. And I started thinking, we need other ways of communicating the ideas. I was always fascinated on the way that people could turn data into visualizations, but there's a human element to it that even those data visualizations felt a little bit far. And so I was inspired by many other artists, including an artist from The Guardian who's done work with the New York Times and the UN. Her name is Mona Chalabi. And she also has won Pulitzer for her drawings in the New York Library. And her work, especially around COVID, in transmitting information in visuals was really inspirational. So I started this project in 2020 called Visuals for Virtual, and just giving away visuals like things to check in on how people were feeling, or talking about what's going on with COVID, or inequity, or social justice, and all the things that were coming up. How can we find ways to transmit through visuals? And again, I feel like this idea, IDEA, that model was born not just from the idea of people-based learning, but also visuals, because I think when you use a visual, you're able to communicate ideas with another layer. And so I got inspired to begin to do that, to use visuals as a form of communicating complex ideas that in other settings are left to this sort of like privilege of text and text bias. And it's like all this text and numbers. And one of the things I love, Mona Chalabi had said she wants to take the num out of numbers, which is it's just one of those things like, so how do we find a way? And so I really thought about visuals, of the things we're doing, but also you said it helps you cognitively process as the artist, as the person listening. So graphic recording is slightly different. I had a friend, I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, as I said, and I had a friend say that I was a vibe stenographer, which I love. And I think that the idea being, I'm not necessarily trying to do graphic recordings, which I've done before. And I think that's helpful for myself and sometimes for others to I've always loved taking notes, and I love taking visual notes. I've always done notes with visuals, but I've just taken it with the understanding that I might share this makes it different. And so the idea of visuals, of my own processing, but also to share with others and to be able to communicate ideas that could be complex, or ideas that simply might need another way of thinking about them. And I get inspired by people like Mona Chalabi. There's also an author named Stephanie Harrison, and she wrote a book called The New Happy. And she has beautiful illustrations. And she was in a lab at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's done research on happiness and sort of positive psychology with the person named Martin Seligman, who's done a lot of work in positive psychology. And so Stephanie Harrison wrote this book and included these gorgeous visuals. And in the process of writing a book, you always start with a proposal, and you have to share, I think that the term is like, what's your book? What is the competition for your book? But I'd like to think about it as like, whose books will be on the person's shelf who will buy your book too? Instead of competition, it's like,
Yes.
So Stephanie Harrison is one of those books. And, probably her book is behind me. And I reached out to her when I was writing my proposal, and she immediately said, yes, I'll talk to you. And then I said, tell me about the process of your visuals showing up. Her story is different from mine because she became known partly for her visuals, and and then that had her writing the book. It was so beautiful. They wanted her to create a coffee table book because it was just so beautiful. And she said, well, I'd like to include the research. And so it became this place where you don't normally see this beautiful art and really robust research. So when I got to connect with the publisher of Routledge of the book that I just got to write, I said, it's really important to me that we include color visuals in all the chapters as a part of the communication. And it was one of those things I said, it's not like I was a, tough negotiator. I was so excited to write this book, but I was like, I really want this to happen. And if it doesn't, and they immediately, kudos to them. They immediately said yes, but it's not, color visuals are not something that you normally find in books that also include research in my
no,
experience.
you get datas or spreadsheets and
Right.
cells and those things. But
Graphs,
this is
yeah.
graphs. Exactly, that's the word I'm looking for. Graphs, charts, all those things.
Yeah.
So this is it's a beautiful book inside and out. And
thank you.
I feel like the next question I want to ask, we could take a whole episode to talk about. And indeed, I have spent so much time on this podcast talking with educators and therapists and psychologists and parents and teens about the role of technology and screens and social media and big tech and ed tech in terms of parenting and connection and our attention and our relationship to attention, right? I've spent seasons focusing on this. And so often, as I was reading the book and thinking about people-based learning, I was thinking about it in the context of raising kids and where we find ourselves in these conversations about digital literacy. And I think you are articulating in this book the vision that we want for our kids that I don't think I had properly put into words so effectively. And you say what you say in the book, and I highlighted and underlined and sent this one paragraph to all my friends in this committee I'm on, is that people-based learning is not anti-tech, it's pro-human.
Exactly.
And when I read that, I had a visceral reaction in my body, and I can't even describe it because I think I've been holding on to this fear because I think we live in a very fear-based world right now around tech and screens and the manosphere and anxious generation and, all the things, which I think are, there are things we need to hear and know about, but it has me tightened up and constricted and just wanting to just take everything away and say, no, and you can't do it and give me your screen and put my head in the sand. Right. And I mean, literally, and on this side note, anecdotally, when I go to my committee meetings on digital literacy at our school and coalition of parents and educators in Milwaukee who care about this stuff, my 14-year-old rolls his eyes. He's like, "Oh, there you go, Mom, off to your anti-screen friends meeting." So he feels this coming from me, right? And so when I read that sentence that it's not anti-tech, it's pro-human, it was like a sigh of relief, articulating this vision that ultimately we're all working for our kids, right? What do we want? We want connection. We want relationships. We want eye contact. We want empathy. We want all the skills that we need in real life to solve the conflicts that are happening in real life, by the way, and building connections and learning to grow as humans. So I guess I don't really have a question. I just want a debt of gratitude.
No, can I speak to that though? Yes. I know you didn't ask a question. I also have a 14-year-old and I also have a 19-year-old, and they have experienced a life that's very different from the way I grew up and you probably grew up. We didn't have this kind of screen availability. And we probably had limited, I remember I had limited television time. It was all kinds of things. And without getting into the debate, I definitely believe that it is not anti-tech. It is pro-human. That is the bottom line. I'm very curious what your child would say to the anti-screen meetings you go to, what he really believes, because I will give you an example. So you mentioned the anxious generation. One of the things that I see as an opportunity in that conversation is ensuring that there are young people reacting to what that is all about. There are 14-year-olds even. Where are the panels of young people saying, here are the kinds of things we need to be doing, because they're aware of it and they're in it. And if we're just from above taking this idea of the hierarchy and I think part of what you begin to understand in people-based learning and what we saw becomes so much more rich when you're intergenerational in anything, any conversation. But there's a hierarchy of the teacher or the policymaker comes in. What are young people feeling? And certainly, as developmentally appropriate. I will say I was listening to a show and, in the car with my husband, and they mentioned Jonathan Haidt. He's like, oh, we should turn this off because I know it gets you upset. And it's not that the work that he's done and the careful research that he's done gets me upset. It's that there is no balance in the conversation. They went right to creating policy that's not really what the research says. So maybe you want to take that out. I don't know. I feel like, yeah. Anyway,
no. I think there's room for that. I think there has to be that kind of. That's exactly what people base. That's friction, right?
Yeah,
we talk about
it's friction, and friction is really good. And you really need to be around people to help your understanding of what their stories are, why they're feeling the way they're feeling. But one of the most compelling conversations that I've heard regarding this idea of tech and like this pro-human versus, it's not anti-tech. There was a young guy. He is now, I guess he must be a junior or a senior at Columbia. His first name is Maximilian. I can't remember his last name. It's very long. And he has been part of conversations around, just serving as youth voice, saying, the anxious generation, specifically that's talking about like it's making everybody anxious. He says, there are so many other things that are making us anxious and we're losing track of the root cause because we're focusing on this. And this, there could be some conversation around how technology, it's actually a very small percentage if you read the, primary sources, but again, they're inaccessible. So no one's going to go back and read those primary sources. And so what's transmitted is this is making people anxious because it's correlated with the year that this became more prolific. And what, young voices are saying, and I feel like we need more, let's listen to people to talk about all of the other things that are happening in the world that could legitimately be root causes, and understand that, some of the primary sources are also finding the kids that are more attracted to things like social media tend to go into it with more anxiety. So the directionality is really important, and understanding the human behind the policies we're making, understanding the human element of the research is really important. But getting back to the pro-human, I want to follow, and I'm not going to say like it's ideal in my house. Oh, my house, they don't, no. I have the same challenges. I also, my son and my younger son and some of his friends, this is not the child that graduated from the school. This is my 8th grader. They have, and I don't know if this is going to sound too privileged. They don't have phones. And it's a choice. And I know some people might have phones and it's not a choice. It is a choice for them. They decided, and they're some of the few in their 8th grade class. And we live in a city and they walk and they're around on their own, but they're I guess it's old school. I don't know if they probably could borrow a phone if they needed to for that reason, but they've resisted. They are saying, why do we need something on us all the time? And that gives me so much hope.
Yeah.
And it's pockets of getting that kind of leadership and listening to kids and thinking about anyway, I could go off on this.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
I still understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a group here in Milwaukee called Disconnect who meet with teens exactly to do that, to just talk, to let them have a space to talk about not only, screens and their relationship to them. That's, a small part of the meeting, but also just to reflect on how you doing? Hey, let's put that down, put it in a bag over here for this meeting. And let's just talk, the 6 of us in a circle, we'll just talk. And they're really, I'm a part of this connection coalition I mentioned, just to help. How can we grow that? How can we create that model everywhere, because I think that is what is missing and why this is so timely that this is coming up, because that is what we need more of, is these humans in relationship, in circles, in community. So
absolutely. Yeah. We did a project. Part of the reason that we know each other is mutual friend and colleague for me. And we did some projects with the organization she works for, Cortico, in which we, of course, we did this small group conversation, but we've also looked at how young people can be part of the contributing to the creation of policies around all of these things that we're talking like at them instead of with and learning with and through them.
Mm.
And just finding those spaces to have small group conversations, have those intergenerational conversations. Where is the space for that? What will draw people? How do we have opening up places where they're actually going to want to join and have conversations? What are the things that will enable us to connect
Yes.
in ways that
Yes.
are intergenerational so we can learn from each other?
Oh, I can't wait to read the outcomes of that those conversations. Well, I love this conversation, and I feel like this is something that maybe we could come back for a part two at some point with some of the women that I'm in conversation with in Milwaukee about these topics of kids and screens, and how building community around that as opposed to just talking down to them. So
Yeah.
I will put a pin in that one, but I'm also curious, what is your plan or push to spread this? Right, your book has been out for a month. I'm sold.
Mhm.
But
Thank
how
you.
are you sending it to, like, how do we get this into teacher programs? What is the plan to getting this out there? And is it a fundamental shift in pedagogy with what they teach, or is it, like we were saying, kind of not at all, and we just need to go back to it?
I think it depends on the setting that you're in. I mean, certainly we talk in education about the model that's being used in traditional schools being, created during the Industrial Revolution when there were
Mm,
factories. And I think that conversation is something that you hear everywhere. And it makes the idea of recognizing, things like well-being, being people-based learning is really rooted in that as well. I mean, there
mm,
are real outcomes when you connect with humans that you'll find beyond what you traditionally measure in schools. Part of my excitement right now is to do what we're doing right now. So people have asked, and I've had different opportunities, and I will engage in them. The Free Library of Philadelphia is very large, and they're like, "Do you want to do a launch part? Some kind of launch that's official." I will quote a friend of mine. Her name is Sunana Chand, and she is presently directing a group called the Reinvention Lab, working with teachers across the country, thinking about ways to support them. And she's just a very human leader. She's done a lot of really interesting work. When we first connected, it's creepy that I remember something she said when we first connected. But we first connected, one of the things she said to me was organic conversations are inherently inequitable. And it's sort of like,
mm,
how do you process that? But when you think about it, it means that if we just pass things along in our organic conversation, it's just going to stay within maybe like-minded, I don't know, but it's certainly not expanding outward. That comment was something that felt really important as I've been starting schools. I've been trying to build community around co-creation of curriculum and programming, to say, like, who's missing from this conversation.
mm,
My biggest hope is that I get to have conversations like this, and that people hear this and say, you should also be reading this. And it goes beyond even the things that I can imagine would be organic. Like, here's a setting, see what you think about this, and get into conversations. One of the authors that I've gotten to meet in my asking phase of telling people that they inspire me is somebody named Monica Guzman, and she wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That
mm,
Way. And I wrote a post about this on Substack recently. I love the sort of visual analogy that she creates by saying that we are spending a lot of time on our back porch, and we need to spend time on our front stoop. And that might not be the exact language. I live in a city, and like, we have a front stoop. And if you sit outside on your front stoop, there'll be people that will pass by that you don't know what their politics are or their backgrounds are, and you might be able to be in conversation because it's more open. If we keep these kinds of conversations on our back porches, it's just those who we invite
mm,
in. And I am on a mission to find more front stoops and find places where we can reach beyond and just have conversations, get this into teachers' hands. I've had the greatest opportunity, even in the last, it's been out for a month, but actually before the book came out, I got some opportunities to connect with various organizations and give talks and workshops. But I'd like to say that what I really desire, all of that is great. But part of that process is not just the moment that you're connecting with people. It's not the workshop, it's the room, it's the people there that are engaging in conversation that sustain it and that I want to keep in contact with, and that maybe they join us for, you're talking about your Milwaukee group, or we have a Zoom that invites people in to have conversations, or it goes beyond whatever the moment is that I have the opportunity to join people. I love the idea of spreading this through. I'm just thinking about gatherings where we can talk about what it means to be people-based. Last Friday, I got to do one, and it was so connective. And I got to do one, I got to talk to another school in Washington also last week, and to plan for summer institutes with teachers that I'm getting to do in Ohio and in Massachusetts. And all of these are, I'm so excited to just be in the presence of people that will both support and push against, because that's how we're learning. Well, this works here and this doesn't work here. That's great. So I am looking, the push is really both going to spaces that are not organic. Hey, this is like a group that I would have never been able to connect with, but also those places that it feels resonant. And this might be something that they're looking to name. I've been in rooms where this is the work people are doing and they had no name. Yes. And that sense that you don't have a name for it makes it really hard to say, we need to do this more. What is it that we need to do more? Or what does it mean to be pro-human? And it isn't even just about having relationships. It's recognizing all that we can learn with and through each other in the settings that we're in. How can we bring whatever it is? And it doesn't mean at the expense of other ways. It's a way. Right. And it's unnamed. And so I just welcome conversations and things like this. I'm so appreciative just to get to talk. I love talking to small groups, but also like larger groups. And how do we break those down and make those settings more human too? I've been also doing work where we're planning gatherings around how do you make it more people-based? And I think, at its root, if you understand the purpose of our gathering, why do we do things like go to conferences? We're learning with and through each other. Otherwise, we can learn in a different way. So remembering that and creating those kinds of opportunities intentionally, using a people-based learning lens for schools and work and life and gatherings, that's the place that I hope this will expand intentionally.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like you need to get on with Priya on one of her Substacks. And I know you.
Well, I asked her to blurb the book, and she she did write me back, and she just came out with a new book, so she's really busy. But she offered to share it out, and certainly, I'm so inspired by her, and a lot of the work that she's done in recognizing the continuing relationship you can have with people if you're gathering with them. That's part of the inspiration. It's always been. So.
Yeah. I mean, who are your critics, I guess? Who like maybe standardized testing people and people who promote that, or textbook company? Who wouldn't want to do this kind of work?
Well, I will tell you, having worked with standardized testing people, they are not that bad. And that's why we have to they're brilliant. And they're actually some places, I don't know, I can't generalize across all these settings, but I would say that in some settings, what we need to do is come together. When I started working with those standardized testing people, I went into an interview and I said, I think I'm not the right person to be here. And they said, we need you in our conversations. And so we need this side of thinking about how we're not capturing everything important, and how we need to create settings in which, can you measure all of this? And, who are the critics? Skeptics that might say, oh, yeah, that's good. But when you go to school, you have to learn X, Y, and Z. You have to. And I am not saying that you don't. I think that we in education tend to, um, in my experience, many people will take one side or the other side. You are, and there's so many conversations like that, and it's almost as if it's like these silos that have, I don't know where I'm going with this. I was going to say soundproof walls, but the idea that we're not listening to each other, when if you actually were in the same room together, you probably would disagree. I've been in places where I might fundamentally disagree with people who believe that there is a core knowledge curriculum versus something that can emerge from the communities you're working with. How can we speak across those conversations in recognizing that it isn't like your orientation to the knowledge? It's really recognizing that our schools are becoming less about a place to sort of like acquire knowledge and more about a place to develop humans. And if we can orient ourselves to recognize that human development becomes the purpose of school, and the other things are really important to human development, but if we can gather ourselves in the center of our why and recognize that it's developing humans, we can look at these other things and say, well, that's the way that you think we should do it. But let's also say the skill of empathy is going to help somebody understand this person that's not like them, that's suffering in the world. The skill of critical thinking, in being intellectual about something, the skill of recognizing what relational intelligence is, the skill of disagreeing without disengaging, which is one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Those skills are life skills that we very rarely, I don't know, I mean, we very rarely name and put intentionality around. How to care for each other, how to having a, we were in an orientation for my son's 9th grade class, and they talked about a class that's going to be on how to care about each other. And I was like, I love that class. It was for 9th graders. But like, we don't talk about that. We just leave it up to the world and parents. And I understand that. But imagine joining with other young people and recognizing people might have their cultural differences. They're going to be, thinking about the way our brains work, how people express, neurodivergent brains, and all of the differences that we're going to come in contact with. How can we be intentional about rooting ourselves in human development?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm a school counselor by training. I haven't done that for a while now, but we were inching toward that conversation, like schools would implement programs like Second Step if they had a budget for it. And so the social emotional learning was like an hour a week or an hour a month if you only had a part-time school counselor or whatever. But I feel like it's a conversation we're going to have to move faster towards, and we are moving faster towards with the whole AI, right? And AI being able to do the stuff and leaving what is the most important thing in a room, which is the human connection that AI can't replace, right? So thank God.
Yeah. No, and actually they're doing research around that too. I don't know what it's called, like bot companions. There was a study that was done recently. I can send you a link for it, looking at people connecting with another person, connecting with an AI bot, or journaling. And they were looking at outcomes related to loneliness. And what they found, I mean, it can be predicted, but in the short term, people all felt good afterwards. In the long term, the only thing that mattered were the humans connecting with other humans.
Yeah, I believe it. I think we all do fundamentally, which is why I feel like once this gets out there, it's just it's gonna fly. It's gonna explode.
I hope so. I hope so, because it is the place where I get so excited, and you get a little bit. It's like you have a crush on your own work. You can't stop thinking about it, and like it comes up in every conversation, and But it's like I feel like I just want to have conversations with individuals and recognize that we all, like what you said. It's like it seems so simple and maybe obvious, but then it feels really profound.
Yeah.
We just need to say it out loud.
Yes. I have so many more questions about your work, and I want to be mindful of your time. And I realize we haven't even got to why I emailed you in the first place, because I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Porches Substack. So what I'll probably do, I think I will end this here and then make a part 2 episode. Of course, I'll link to that post so listeners can read the whole thing, but just this concept of front versus back. Because my intent on this podcast is to leave listeners with little nuggets of things that they can try on the daily wherever they find themselves. Ooh, listeners, I hate to cut it off here, but we have been talking for almost an hour and we haven't even gotten to the conversation that I initially reached out to her about, this beautiful Substack essay that she wrote. So I'm going to pause it here. And next week, I will drop the end of our conversation, which is only about 15 minutes more. But I hope that you enjoyed this introduction to people-based learning. I hope that you see that Jane said it much more eloquently than I did, that it is both simple and profound, ancient and radical, timeless and timely. I hope that you will get a copy of this book and have your own aha moments, because what you connect to in the book may be very different than what I connect to based on where we are. And isn't that what we could talk about on our stoop if we could get together? We could share our stories about what we take from this people-based learning. I think she is so on the mark with this concept and with the timeliness of it, because as we talk about all the things that disconnect us, the social media, the epidemic of loneliness and chatbot friends and all of those things that scare us so much, let us remember that we're not that many steps away from, or we don't have to be that many steps away from storytelling and learning in community and learning bidirectionally, learning from people above us, people below us, learning at all the different intersections where we find ourselves, whether that's race or age or class or gender. I think with all the conversation that is out there about how we're moving away from each other, this people-based learning and this concept that she is not only naming, but putting some legitimate research behind is a key part of the solution, a key part of what will bring us together, what will remind us that we are human. Even if the bots are out there doing other things for us, we still need our humanity to connect and to make eye contact and to have empathy and to show empathy and to bring compassion into our humanity, which, let's face it, we need more of. So thank you to Dr. Jane Shore for this conversation. I will wrap it up next week so you can hear the conversation about the Substack and our final thoughts on building community and connection. All the links will be in my show notes. And if you're new here, I would love to have you join my newsletter. You can also find links in the show notes to how to do that. I only send emails when episodes come out. I wouldn't know how to spam if I tried. I'm not on Substack or the socials, so that's really the way to communicate with me if you want to stay in touch with Gather, Connect, Create. All right, until next week, be well.